Hey everybody, I'm Josh Jenkins with OCPs to Overalls, and this is the first episode of our new podcast series we started called Growing Tall. We didn't set out to start a podcast series at all, but we were having really great conversations with people in kind of private in like our Instagram inbox, and we wanted to find a way to make those public, kind of in like a town square social media setting where people could listen in and contribute and all that kind of stuff. And a podcast series seems like the best way to do that. And I know everyone and their mothers has a podcast series nowadays. But I still think it's a really good medium for us to share the conversations we're having with really great people doing great things. And today we have Justin and Jenni from Rebel Pastures on our first episode today. Thank you guys so much for coming on and giving up some of your time to talk a little bit this morning. For those that might not be familiar with you, you guys want to maybe just talk a little bit about yourselves, maybe how you got started in farming, maybe explain what Rebel Pastures is for all of our listeners.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take it away.
Yeah, you start.
So we're a first generational farm, and what really happened is we started during COVID, and during March of 2020, all the lockdowns started happening, and we kind of got pissed. We couldn't sit around and do nothing, and so at the time, we're all locked down, things were weird, so we started farming, and I think we did 75 meat birds at first, and we sold out of them. And my wife had kind of a farm background. I had none. I grew up in suburbia, so, well qualified to be a farmer here. But we looked at each other like, hey, are we really doing this? And we said yes, and we jumped in. And the following year, we raised 3,600 meat birds on pasture, moving them every single day.
Wow.
And got involved in our local farmers markets and just really reached out to the community. And one of the things that I've learned my time serving the Marine Corps in Iraq was food was the common denominator that brought all of us together. And I remember sitting down with sheiks in a local town, having a meal with them. And that just really reverberated with me during COVID of like all the divisiveness that's going on in our country, our society, and food is one common denominator. I think that brings people together. So we saw it as a way to add good in a time that wasn't good. And that really, to me, it hurt my soul, I think, just seeing our country divided and torn apart and just everything that's going on and loss of freedoms. And it just really was so quickly for us that we just couldn't stand by and do nothing. So farming was our tool. Farming was our vehicle for us to rebel in our own way. And that's really where Rebel Pastures comes from, is we're rebelling against the bigs, because so often the bigs, they're not thinking about you and I and, us common people, right? And so that was our way to take action in a way that was serving people and not just taking and harming.
That's pretty awesome. That actually hits home quite a bit for at least for me personally. I'm sure my wife would agree, but we didn't get into all of this until just about a year after COVID, when things were sort of becoming normal again, but not really. But the whole sludge that we all went through with COVID was actually a huge deciding factor on us deciding we should get out of the military, and I think we need to do something better. And so that actually led us to think about farming, and neither of us have any farming background. And so it was a huge change for us as well. So I really like that. I think that's pretty awesome. So what did you guys, you said you started with 75 meat birds and then you went all the way up to, you said 3,600?
Yeah. We started talking with a local, like a subscription delivery service. And at that time we had, the first year we actually ended up raising about 300 birds. We did start with 75, then we did another batch of like another 75. Gotcha. So we got up to about 300. And we reached out to, actually they reached out to us, the subscription service, and they wanted 1,500 birds. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was a big jump just from 300. And then we realized that just looking at the demand that we could double that and still sell it. So we just jumped in. And that summer, I mean, we couldn't, it was during COVID, we couldn't go anywhere. We have two girls. We really wanted to show them that we weren't just going to sit around and wait. So we just dove in, and we got batches of 600 birds at a time. And we spent our entire summer doing that. I mean, with meat chickens, it's a daily task every single day doing them. So it was just Justin and I that first summer working on the farm, and our kids had a big part in it too. The next year we changed a little bit. We do a fall farm tour, which we can talk about later, but we learned from other farmers that have been in it longer than us that it's not just about what we want and what we want to grow. It's more about what our land can support. So we decided that we had 3,600 is about as much as we could raise on our current property. And on top of that, it's not the best thing for our land just to raise only chickens. So the next year we added in sheep, hogs, cattle, and then we also raised layers as well. So we did the next year we added in all those animals, and that was kind of our growth. And then this year we're increasing the amount of animals that we're raising too.
So when you guys got started in farming, were you already set up with land and the capabilities to just jump right in like that? Or did you actually have to maneuver a little bit, maybe, sell the house, buy a different piece of property or something like that? You're in Michigan, correct? Were you already there in Michigan?
Yeah, we're in Michigan. Yep.
We were fortunate. We just moved from Texas back up to Michigan, I don't know, a year or two before COVID hit. So we were situated on land, thankfully. We had purchased 37 acres up here in Michigan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But so we were fortunate in that sense. But as far as infrastructure, zero. So, I mean, it was all, even trying to get lumber at the time, we were building a hen house, and we started with Joel Skelton tractors, 10 by 12. 5 chickens, meat birds inside of them. And that's what we did, and from there we progressed, and now we move our chickens in a 16 foot by 24 foot prairie schooner. And
wow,
we now have 8 or 9 of those. So where we started from to where we are today, we progressed for sure, but we had nothing starting out. It was all from the ground zero.
Sure.
But we felt committed though very early. When everybody else was there, we saw a lot of people during COVID waiting for things to go back to the way they were. And we just didn't believe things were ever going to go back to the way they were. We saw that things had, they changed for good. So we weren't waiting for somebody to give us permission or to tell us, hey, you should do this. We saw our opportunity, and it's connected to our heart and soul. What better to do than getting back out there to the land and reconnecting with who we really are,
Yeah, absolutely. And even though COVID is kind of past, and we now kind of treat it as more of a common flu, I still think it led to things that are still suggesting that we need to be creating our own food at home. So even though that ship has kind of moved on a little bit, I feel like, without getting too political, I guess, I still think it's great that people are farming, that COVID got people into growing their own food, getting a piece of land, being able to self-sustain themselves a little bit better. Because it doesn't look like the world's gotten a whole lot better, even though that COVID has moved on. So I think that's kind of,
for us, Josh, it wasn't even just COVID. it was the breakdown supply chain, and we've been educating ourselves on food for years prior to COVID. So when it all happened, we said enough is enough. But when that supply chain broke so quickly and there wasn't food in the stores, if you didn't see that and go, what's going on here? You got your head in the sand. And I was just reading this morning, Tyson, they provide every pound for poultry, for pork, and for beef, 1 out of 5 pounds is coming from Tyson. So they're one of the big gorillas, and there's only a handful of them providing predominantly most of our food. And our food's making us sick today. Look at diseases and allergies and sickness and obesity. Half our country is obese.
Yeah.
If the alarm bells aren't going off, I don't know what's ever going to make them go off. We're in a crisis mode really, when it comes to our food system.
Yeah.
And the way that we're destroying our lands with conventional ag, it's not sustainable. I don't even mean from like a hippie perspective. I just mean like functionally,
Just a practical
we're
standpoint.
destroying it. Yeah. Our watersheds, our waterways, our water aquifers, and our soil and our topsoil, and just all the chemicals. And it's not good.
Yeah. And I think I think somehow I feel like we have a very short attention span or a very short memory retention, because something terrible will happen, like the food chain completely just breaking and the grocery stores being empty. But you give it a year or so of it being fixed and people kind of forget, I guess, that it happened in the first place. Yeah. And it's kind of fixed itself a little bit. The food chain is still extremely fragile. But shortly after, then the whole Russia-Ukraine thing happened, and they're a huge exporter of, they disrupted the wheat exportation business. Fertilizer wasn't getting exported. The chain is still really broken. It's just a little bit, it's a couple layers hidden, I guess. And people, I don't think, are taking note of that or even remembering that the food chain broke just a year or two ago. So I think it's pretty wild that we moved past stuff like that so quick.
In a very similar fashion, Josh, what happened in 2007, 2008? I don't know where you were, what you remember of that era, but when we had all the foreclosures, well, what's going on today really is because we never dealt with it back then. We fixed a couple things, tweaked a couple things. We never solved the underlying fundamental issue. And I think that's what's probably going to happen with our food system. We're going to put some Band-Aids on it, some duct tape on it, kick it down the road for a couple more years. But until the next thing happens, so.
Yeah. I think it's really great that even when something bad like COVID happens, it pushes people in the right direction. Maybe not gently every time, but it always makes people gravitate towards the solution. And I think the solution was really learning how to raise your own food, learning how to start a garden in your backyard, or put some pots on the windowsill or something like that. So I'm really happy with the results of all of this that we've gone through recently. And I think a lot of people have gotten better because of it. So I think that's really cool that you can kind of point back to COVID and say that kind of propelled you guys a little bit into starting your own farm. I think that's awesome. How did you guys decide on Michigan? I haven't been there personally, but I imagine that's not the best, most perfect climate for farming. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, we're originally from Michigan, so that's why we're here. We both were born and raised here.
Okay.
But one thing that people don't know about Michigan, or maybe don't understand about Michigan, is we actually have really fertile soil here because we have winter, because we have it was trees here for a long time. We have a lot of soil. So it allows our soil to rest. So then during the summer, when it grows, our grasses grow, it's actually very nutrient dense. It's much more so than like the climates like Georgia and the southern states where they can grow all year long and they raise their animals on pasture all year long. They don't ever get a rest. And then there's, it's just the nutrition isn't the same as our incredibly rich summers that we have up here.
Gotcha. Okay. That's actually really similar to what we're doing, because I'm out here in Colorado right now. I've been stationed out here for a couple of years, and me and my wife just moved from California a couple of years ago. But our plan is to move back to my home state, which is North Carolina. We had initially looked at some other places like Tennessee and Virginia, but ultimately our deciding factor was like, where is our family? Where are we from? Where do we know? And
us too.
That makes sense that you guys would move back to Michigan. I get that a lot because we're very excited to move to North Carolina, where my family is, and I just think that's a huge factor, is like where your support network is, where your community is, because you can farm all day long, but if you don't have a support network nearby, it's kind of I feel like it's kind of pointless to be like a one man show without anybody, no community around you.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. When we first started Rebel, I should say when we first moved into this house, we bought the land because we were trying to get away from people. We just wanted space. We'd lived in the suburbs for a while, and we needed some space. But the ironic thing with Rebel is we unintentionally have built this tribe around us, and it's become the coolest thing. Like the friendships that we've built through it, our customer base, other farmers that we've met and have learned from. It's created this awesome community that we never expected to find when we started Rebel. Yeah.
That's awesome. Speaking of like people you're learning from, other farmers and stuff like that, who's inspired you kind of along the way? I know you mentioned you started with Joel Salatin Tractors, and I think he's probably a pretty universal starting point for a lot of people, myself included. I noticed in a previous social media post, you guys have been to APA a couple times, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys are pretty in the weeds, learning from other people. Who are some people that you really follow? Who are some people that you're reading their books? Who kind of propelled you into all this? If you could point to some people.
Will Harris. I'm a huge fan of Will Harris. I like his attitude, I guess. I like his kind of feistiness, and just throwing it out there.
Sure.
And so been fortunate to do a couple things with him. I was down at their CFAR, which is Center for Agricultural Resilience. And really what they're about is small town rural communities employing. I think he's got 180 so employees in that town. He's the largest employer in that county, but generally farming that land, rejuvenating the land. And just, I don't know, we've been very fortunate to spend some time around him, both at conferences and on his farm. And one day he shared
that's awesome.
Several hours with us. We were going down there just on our farm tour that we do each fall. And he was gracious enough to kind of drive us around his Jeep and explaining all the different animals. And I think that was when we realized we can't just be chicken farmers. It's like, oh man, we got to have them all. And so that's really where I think it came from, was seeing how all the animals work together in the land, how the cattle, how they have an impact, high intensity impact, but for a low duration of time. Seeing how the pigs are forested, seeing how the sheep were, so gentle on the land, and how they just added so much nutrient back into the soil, and just seeing that circle of life. Once we saw that, it's like once you learn something, you can't forget it. And
sure,
that really stuck with us. And I think that was the turning point where we went from just raising chickens to we're all in on the food system. So Will Harris has been a big inspiration for us. Greg Judy's been a big inspiration on the cattle side for me. We follow everybody. I mean, you can learn something from anybody and everybody. And that's why we go to conferences, because it's not, Seven Sons is a huge one for us in the Midwest. They're crushing it. They're rock stars. We love learning from them. They're very generous with their information. Yeah. And they're all about compressing time frames, where if you can learn from other people who've done it, you don't have to make all the same mistakes that we made or someone else made. And I think together, collectively, we're stronger as a whole. And when we share, instead of having this competitive mindset where you don't want to share any information or knowledge, I don't see that as the path moving forward. I think it's collectively together we create more awareness, and more people start waking up to, okay, this thing that we think is food in the grocery store, well, is it really food? And what kind of food, what kind of quality food is it? So to answer your question, I mean, we learn from everybody we do. We believe in the power of immersion. And what I mean by that is once we committed to this, we knew the best way for us to learn it was just to jump in. I wasn't going to school and, a bunch of classes. And we go to grazing schools and any kind of event like that we learn from. But it was just the commitment to, we're going to figure this out. And we're moving forward in faith, and not from a religious perspective, but just the faith that we can figure this out together with other people. And so far that has been true.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how me and my wife did it. Was we instead of pursuing our bachelor's degree, we spent the money we would have spent on that and bought 50 broilers. So the same exact thing. We were just like, let's just jump in and just see how it goes. Proof of concept. Let's see how this works, and if we're even any good at this. And I think that was the best education we could have had, was hands-on, just do it. Yeah,
Which
it's awesome.
I think is a lost art for a lot of people, or for our country. You know, we've kind of gotten away from actual skills, trades. You know, and we've advocated for college for everybody, which I'm not saying is, I've got my own beliefs on that. However, but if we lose those skills, the skill sets that we need to create and add value, you know, whether it's a meat product, you know, whatever it is, but a service or a product, adding value, you know, I think that's where the real secret is.
Sure. Yeah. You were talking about Will Harris, and I actually didn't know who he was until probably 6 months to a year ago. But he, you said he was hosting conferences out in Georgia, or you guys actually visited with him?
Both.
Yeah. So the first time Jenni,
okay,
awesome at this. I'll let her explain it, but she set up this cross country road trip for us, and this is during COVID too.
Oh wow.
People were kind of still standoffish, you know, but so we visited farms that were regenerative farming across the country, all the way from Michigan all the way down. We went down to North Carolina, then all the way down to the Gulf Coast, right, and back up.
Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. Mm-hmm. We did.
That's very similar to what Justin Rhodes did.
Yeah, similar to that. We've done it 2 years in a row now, and I didn't plan for it to be like a yearly thing, but I think it's going to become that. It was by far like our kids' favorite thing they've ever done in their lives. So we've learned a lot as we visited each farm. Mm-hmm. Some were small, some were large, and just some were raising just chickens. We went to one farm in Tennessee that he had 800 Katahdin ewes that he was raising on pasture. So,
oh wow,
yeah, lots of awesome people. I mean, really, and then seeing that there's multiple different ways to do this. There's not one way to raise a chicken. There's not one way to raise cattle. I mean, farming is trial and error. It really is. And there's times where it's super frustrating, right? Like when the cattle get out of a 7-wire high tensile fence, that's 8,000 volts. It's frustrating, you know, trying to get back through that fence. There's challenges there. And any plans that you had that day, well, your calendar just got cleared real quick.
Yep.
So, but I think that's part of almost the allure, you know, and if we think back about our country, it wasn't that long ago that the people that came here were very rugged, had to be very rugged. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I don't know, it feels almost like full circle coming back to some of those roots of this country. Like I know in my history, I have farmers that are way deep, you know, generations down that I never really even thought of, but so.
Yeah, it's, I was just talking to my friend the other day about this, and he mentioned, I think, an interview that he saw about someone who made the analogy that zoochosis, the mindset that happens to animals that are in captivity in a zoo, where they become depressed and they have no desire to do anything. They don't eat, they don't play. Right? They're in a cage in the zoo for people to look at. They become entirely depressed because they're not in their correct environment. They don't have room to graze. They don't have room to mob with others, things like that. And he said this interviewer that he was watching related it back to what's happened in America with how we've had it kind of taken on the same thing, being not in our natural correct environment. We've built these giant cities and we've piled everybody, 20 tall, and nobody has a backyard anymore. And it's kind of the same thing that's happened to us. We're not living the same lifestyle that we were 200 years ago. And because of it, we have all sorts of mental issues, and 50% of people right now I don't think can get Adderall because there's a shortage. There's just so many mental issues that continue to grow because, and I think it's primarily our environment that we've created, that we're not where we're supposed to be. We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. I think that's a huge factor.
Yeah, when we're out there on the pastures, you get the sunshine, you hear the chickens, you hear the cattle bawling. I mean, you hear the pigs rooting around. You could just stand there forever. I mean, at least for me,
Yeah.
there's something so peaceful, but so powerful, so calming, yet so unpredictable. It's just,
Yeah, I know Jill Salatin talks about it, like the cityfication of our country and how more people had moved into the city. But it really takes away, because it really removes that connection that they have with the land. They have the connection and that where their food comes from. I think it makes people focus more on processed foods and choose processed foods over whole foods, and because they just don't understand. They don't know how to cook it. They don't know how to use it. They don't know. They don't understand the work it takes to get it to that point. So yeah, we totally understand that too.
we've become so disconnected from our food source. We've become so disconnected from our farmers, from the way that animals are raised. We don't even know anymore. And that's why all these claims on labels are so deceptive, and they're used to psychologically make people feel good about their purchasing decision versus actually doing the work to get to know a local farmer, ask the hard questions, go visit the farm, see what they're doing, look at their animals.
Right.
There is a vast difference. We have been inside of commercial hog barns. If people saw and smelled that, I can understand why people don't eat meat from that sense. Versus raising animals on pasture, and you see that circle of life, the symbiosis of an animal that is, being nourished from that forage, and then they're giving back in the form of manure and urine, and then you move that animal and you see what nature does. You can just see and understand, for me, instantly, that's what nature intended, not to be mass produced in a barn.
Yeah, and it creates a lot of problems that don't need to exist, like the methane issue. Like if we would feed animals what they're supposed to be eating, they wouldn't create all this gas that's destroying the ozone layer, and we have to create these methane collection systems for their manure and things like that. It creates problems that just aren't supposed to exist. We shouldn't have to be coming up with solutions to collect methane from landfills and stuff like that. It all just kind of compounds all these bad decisions that have come about from raising animals the way we have been for a while now. And it's very important that we get back to feeding them grass like they're supposed to. I mean, I drove by a feedlot yesterday with probably 10,000 sheep in it, and there wasn't a single blade of grass anywhere. It was just wild. Just mud and dirt. It's crazy.
And they're probably being fed grain, and they don't need grain.
Yeah.
And then they might even be called grass-fed, because you can still feed them grain, grass-fed approved grain, and they can still.
Right.
The further you go,
and that's where those labels come.
Yeah,
well, that's what I was going to say. The further you do the research and you learn about this stuff, the more it kind of, I don't want to be negative here, but it kind of angers you. It's like, holy crap, like it gets so deep. How far down do you go? And then you get into medications, and you realize that the pharmaceutical industry is shipping over half of their products to ag. So why? When we raise animals on pasture, when we rotate them, like we move our sheep every 2 days. Why do we do 2 days? Well, day 3 is when we have to start worrying about
parasites.
So if we move them, we don't have to give them more.
Yeah.
So it's, if we can work with the cycles of nature instead of against it. And I truly believe one of the issues here in America is that we have this mentality of sanitize and kill everything. So farmers go into a field, they burn it down with glyphosate, right? So you spray the Roundup, you kill it, and then we no-till drill a seed into the ground. Oh, we're being so great for our soil by no-tilling it after we burn it down with a chemical. So everything about what we do is mass extrapolation. We've become so great in America at engineering everything to the very last little bit of extraction, to the point of where it's no longer resilient. It's very complex, but it's not resilient. And so when one little thing goes wrong, the whole system comes off course. Versus nature, when we farm, with our land and our animals the way that she intended, when something happens, it's so resilient that it just adjusts, it bounces off. It doesn't break down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that speaks a lot to the way that we heavily depend on fertilizers to fix a lot of our issues too. Like you said, we extract every bit we can out of the soil, and then in order to fix the problem we just made, we dump a lot of fertilizer on it. And we don't even create a whole lot of fertilizer here. Most of it is shipped from other foreign countries that we're entirely dependent on. So that just creates another link in that chain that's really easy to break, and it's not sustainable. I think that's one of the biggest things is we should have the ability to sustain ourselves. We shouldn't. It's important to lean on others and have that community, but when your community is spread across oceans, you can't
Right.
rely on those people to keep food on your plate. So I'm a huge advocate for, if you can do something at your house, or you can do something for yourself that will keep food on your plate, you should do it there. If you can make compost instead of buying fertilizer, then you absolutely need to make compost. Even if you don't care about the natural properties of compost, or you're trying to restore the soil, if you can create something at home that you don't have to go to the store to buy, I think that's incredibly empowering for a lot of people who don't have that power anymore. I mean, you go to the grocery to get food, you have to drive to work every day. We live in this society where they want you to own nothing and buy everything from someone else. And it's really fragile.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about fertilizer. Fertilizer is not natural. Fertilizer was a byproduct from the war effort. So if you want to go back and do some history there and kind of go down that, I don't want to say rabbit hole, but when we use synthetic fertilizer, we're actually weakening our soil health, the biome. And what's happening is it's like a cheap drug. It's like sugar, and that grass or that plant goes for that cheap fix, that easy fix, but it makes it less resilient, where it's not drawing the nutrients it needs from the soil, from the cycles of nature. So we're actually, our fields and our grasses and our pastures, if they're being fed with a synthetic fertilizer, it's almost like a drug addict. I mean, you're giving that grass a quick hit, a quick fix, but it's not sustaining it long term. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on beneath the soil. And when we look at it from that perspective, one of the things that we joke about is we're not raising animals, we're raising healthy soil.
Yeah.
And I've read it takes 100 years to produce 1 inch of topsoil. And then when we disc that land, fill that land, and then a windstorm comes, I know around us, there's lots of cornfields. And those fields are bare for half the year. From November to May, June, they're bare. And so whether it's water runoff, you get a couple inches of rain like we just got, and then you look at the ditches, you see the topsoil going right into the ditches. I mean, it's not good on a lot of different ways, on a lot of different levels. And we're not trying to be self-righteous. Farming is a tough industry. No doubt about it. We're family farm. It used to be a family farm. And around us, there's lots of old farm barns that we can see. And whenever we have farm tours, I always ask people, like, how many farm barns did you see on your way here? And now today, you don't see very many active farms. You see a couple of very large, huge mega farms. And it's still 1, 2, 3, 4 people running the show with these huge $500,000 tractors and combines. And it's crazy. These farmers put $250,000 of corn seed in the ground, honestly, just hoping that the weather turns out. I mean, there's so much risk on the line. We take that for granted, just the daily trials and tribulations. It is tough. And so I don't want to be self-righteous that you have to be regenerative. There's so many people that are just trying to hold on to the land that they've farmed for, their families have farmed for generations, if not century. And something's got to change.
I think that's one of the reasons Will Harris is probably a fantastic example for a lot of people, and a lot of really inspirational to people starting farming, is that his background is industrial,
right.
And his father and his grandfather were neck deep in it, and he realized that it wasn't the correct path, and it wasn't leading to where he wanted to go, and so he made that change even with all of his peers telling him that he's insane. So I think he's a huge testament to making that switch.
I think he took a lot of flack for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did.
I think even his family too. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's got a huge thriving business because of it, and I have not yet to visit his farm, but I would love to one day, because I think it's awesome that he not only has the farm but also has invested into the processing centers, and he's almost kind of connected that chain all the way around to where he's kind of vertically stacked everything into where he can manage the processing aspect of it. He doesn't raise a perfect animal and then has to ship it off to a USDA processor that may not treat their animals properly or use lots of harsh chemicals so I think he's an inspiration for reaching that goal one day of kind of being able to control from chick to table, I think. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
You hit on processing. I mean, we could talk for a long time, this and that, and I don't mean to bring it up for that reason, but processing is a huge bottleneck. It is a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for the small people like us to, I'm not asking for sympathy, but it is hard for small farmers to get slots. I mean, even for cattle, like right now, next month, we can start booking for, 12 months out. So you're at least a minimum of a year in advance.
Isn't that far out?
Yep. So next month we'll open up for our processor where we can get some kill dates. Scheduling, it's
24.
Yep.
That is crazy.
It's a real thing, and it's a real. You try to line all this stuff up, and that's why once you get up and running, I can understand why conventional ag stays the same, because to change once you're set up and running is really hard, in my opinion.
I think one of the risks that, I don't want to speak for Will, but that he might be exposed to is because he doesn't own all of that part of the whole entire process of raising an animal. When you do get to processing, I mean, he puts a lot of animals through his processing plants, and if something were to happen to his processing plants, I don't know what plan B would be. If he were to be shut down for whatever reason in the USDA, like that could be a big risk. Whereas if you're a producer that uses multiple USDA plants, or you have other options available to you, then you have options. But I know one of the reasons he started his plan is because there's no plant by him that he could possibly use. There was nothing USDA near him. So it's a big problem. We take our chickens to a processing plant in Ohio because there's not a USDA processor in our state that can either grind chicken, and that can also handle larger batch sizes. They're all very, very small USDA processors.
And then you run into the issues with federal exemption, state processing versus USDA. Well, if you're operating under a state exemption, you cannot ship that product across state lines. So there's a whole nother part to, okay, so you've raised the animal, you've done all the front end stuff correctly. Well, now you need to market and sell that product. And if you're limited or restricted to what you can do with that product, it's a problem. And we ran into that because we used to use a state processor, and now that we're shipping, it's an issue.
So we haven't gotten too far into the process where we would need a USDA processor. So I'm not entirely familiar with how it goes, but so you're saying there's a state processor, and then there's like a federal level processor, and you have to be.
Each state is different, though.
Yeah,
too.
It's also different between poultry and red meat. Correct. So with poultry, there's exemptions where you can process on your own property, which is probably what you've done, right?
Right.
You've done your own processing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then if you want to take it to a state certified facility, or state inspected facility is what they call it. In Michigan, it's called MDARD is the name of our department. You can sell inside of Michigan.
Direct to consumer.
Okay. Yes.
No retail, no
restaurants,
like only directly to a consumer.
And then if you want to be able to sell outside of the state, or ship it, or sell to a restaurant, anything like that, you have to go through your USDA processor. And and then with red meat, you can sell like halves and wholes of your animal through a local processor. I don't even know what they inspect.
So think of it kind of like a milk share where you're owning part of the animal. So then you're having your own meat process,
like a CSA or something like that.
Yeah,
in Michigan.
You're essentially bringing in your half of a cattle to get processed, or pig, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So you're not selling it. I think what the big key thing is when you are selling that product. That's when
by cut. Yeah.
By cut. That's when it becomes a different game.
So if you do that, then it has to be USDA for red meat.
So there's a difference between a USDA processor and a processor that's inspected by the USDA, like a custom processor.
They are custom processors. They're generally inspected by their state, not the USDA. USDA is federal. All the in-states they have nothing to do with USDA. Some of them try to replicate the USDA standard, but it's not the USDA stamp. I mean, these stamps, the USDA stamp that you see on a package, they literally keep it under a locking key. No kidding. That stamp is under a locking key in a box. So the stamp is a big deal.
And if it sounds confusing, it's
because it is.
Because it is, yeah.
I'm sure it's that way on purpose.
You can call MDAR. I mean, we've called MDAR. We've emailed them, and
they don't even know.
Every person gives you a different answer.
Really,
each inspector has a different level of
very ambiguous.
What they believe, what they think is right, and it's very confusing.
We can let people decide whether it's intentional or not, but it is so complex and so hard. And when you're calling the inspector, the person that's upholding the rules, and they don't know the answer, it's like, come on, people. Like, this is unacceptable. Like in our state, we have this old law that we cannot sell eggs online. What do you mean you can't sell eggs online? So there's a lot of things there. You kind of scratch your head and you hope it's not nefarious, but some things, it's just like the only reason it can make sense is to keep small people from producing and from being a competitor to some of the five bigs, and
sure.
For us, that was really our wake up. Like, this is disgusting. This is not right.
Right.
It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, I read
your community.
Yeah, I read a couple months ago. One of the most recent Joel Salatin books I read was "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal," and I read that on night shift at work, and it was just infuriating. And I wasn't even part of the system. I didn't have chickens at the time. I wasn't doing anything. But it's just crazy how convoluted the entire process has become for small scale farmers. And the book I'm reading now, I think they were quoting a previous president, but it was something like, you have to get big or you have to get out.
Yeah.
And it's, you can't, like you said, with like kill dates, if you're not a huge industry or a huge business, that, it's hard to get a slot for your cattle to be slaughtered. It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah. There's not a lot of processing available for small, whether you're producing for other people or just for yourself. There just is not a lot of processing available. And
it's really hard work. I mean, processing.
Yeah.
When we started farming, we were raising the animals, and it was important to me and Jenny to see that last component, in the processing plant. So we volunteered one day to process 300 chickens, and
oh, wow.
It was eye-opening. You definitely want to keep your mouth shut when you're processing because things go flying. But to have our feet or boots on the ground and to see it and to use the knives in their hands, and it is tough work, day in, day out. And again, just when you get involved, I think you have a greater respect and appreciation for it. And I think it'd be really, if everybody could just have a glimpse of it, not that anybody needs to go into this and make this their full-time gig, but just having a little more understanding gives you a lot more awareness, appreciation, and respect for the products we are consuming. And I think it makes us more conscious consumers on choosing where to spend our dollars. And we're not raising product. I think this is one of the fallacies. People think raising it themselves will be cheaper. It won't be. You can't compete against the huge mega, factory farms that have the systems and scales down that we can never compete with. So we're not competing on price. We're competing on value and nutrition.
Yeah, I think when I think it's important that everybody at least process their animals once, at least. For us, I know when we did our first 50 chickens, we decided to rent some processing equipment from a local farm, and we did all 50 ourselves with a couple friends, and really wasn't looking forward to it. But I think it's important to understand that that's part of the process, and you can't kind of disconnect from that part, but enjoy all the rest of the parts. And it was really eye-opening, and we have an absolutely different view of the food we eat just because of that.
Yeah.
That one day that we killed a bunch of chickens and packaged them up ourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of, I think everyone needs to kill one of the animals that they eat at some point. I think that's
Totally
a huge growing experience for most of people.
I think it makes us more humane too.
Yeah.
And I think if we all had the experience, how much better would we be as a society towards each other, and not to go off into tangent, but I mean, look at all the violence. It really comes down to a lack of respect, in my opinion, of each other. And I think when you do take an animal's life and you process it and you honor it and consume it, it gives you an appreciation that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Right. Going back to USDA processing real quick, I'd love to know your thoughts on the rules and requirements for USDA processing, because you said you process most of your stuff through a USDA processor, right? You guys ship different states.
Mm-hmm.
It's now everything's USDA.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that process? Like I said, I'm not entirely familiar with the process. I don't know the rules on how they do things, but there's plenty of opinion pieces out there on maybe the animals aren't humanely killed, or maybe they use a lot of chemicals to sterilize everything after the animals are processed. Just what are your, because I know you said you've actually visited a lot of those facilities. What are your thoughts on how that process takes place?
I guess to start, we're new to this too, so we're learning as we go. I feel like a lot of the things we learn, it's because a customer comes to us and it has a question and asks us a question, and if we don't know it, we figure it out. Yeah. So we're learning a lot of this too. But yeah, so some of the requirements I believe are USDA requirements. So, we've gone to every processor we've been to that we've taken our animals to. We've gone to and we visited and we've gotten to know them. And I mean, they're family owned businesses. They're small family owned businesses.
Okay.
That some of them have been in generation for five generations. I think Byron Center Meats is either fourth or fifth generation is working in it. So a lot of it that they do is, it's not even that it's like that's the way it's always done, or it's more just USDA requirements.
Okay.
And I know like one of our processors too, they have to spray cattle, but they don't have to spray sheep, with a citric acid solution. Yeah. So I don't know exactly what the requirements are, but it is different for different animals. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
But it's something you've become familiar with because you've toured the facilities and you're okay with whatever that process is, because
yes,
like you said, it probably differs pretty heavily between, a huge facility doing 2 million birds a day for, Costco versus a small family run facility that's also USDA processed or inspected. But they have, I guess, maybe more freedom to take more attention to detail and give more care to maybe what they're doing, I would say.
Yeah. So you think about when you buy meat at a grocery store, at Costco or whatever, and it's thawed, that is being sprayed with that has to be sprayed with things for it to be thawed for that long. Our meat, as soon as
it's fresh.
Yes. As soon as our meat is processed, it's frozen. So it doesn't need to have any preservatives on it. It doesn't have to be sprayed with chlorine or antiseptic to make sure it stays safe. Our meat is frozen immediately as soon as it's cooled enough, then it's put in the freezer. So I mean, the stuff that you're buying from Costco or the grocery stores definitely have preservatives sprayed on them,
Right.
more so than, and those are coming from the big plants, you know,
It's
they're not coming
Mm-hmm.
from small local plants.
a predominantly
like us.
robotic plant, mind you, where
Right.
these carcasses are being processed with robots. I mean, it's
And that's another thing too. So, you know, you think about our small processing plants, like, I don't even know how many cattle he said he could do a day. Do you remember? I mean, it's not, it sounds like a lot, but it's not anything compared to big chicken or big beef.
just big. Just
Yes.
the
I mean,
bigs.
they have thousands and thousands and thousands of animals going through that plant every day. I mean, those all go through before it's all cleaned again, you know, where like our local processing plants, they do a certain amount and then it's cleaned that evening, you know, and they're not processing thousands and thousands of animals in each of their processing plants.
Mm-hmm.
And then if one animal that goes through those mega plants has a bad bacteria on it, like everything is contaminated, you know, it increases the risk of something being spread versus if we had lots of little small plants, if something were to be contaminated, like the risk is so much smaller and it impacts such a smaller amount of people than the giant recalls we have to have for big food.
Once again, it comes down to resiliency. And so when we have more of a smaller, it's not as efficient, but it's more resilient.
Yeah, the more I learn about it, the more I feel like while at the same time we need these small scale farmers, there's also this thing in the back of my head that says we also need a ton of small scale processors, like as equally as the small scale farmers. And so I don't know enough about it, but I feel like one day that needs to be a priority for at least myself is, you know, yes, we need to have the farm, but we also need to have a processor that can process the animals, but also provide a service to the rest of the community that's doing the same thing. I feel like there's a real need for more family-owned, small-scale processors.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a need for people that are willing to do that job as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you support a small farm that uses those processors, the more that industry can grow because there'll be more demand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your dollar is a vote. Every time you spend it, that's a vote you're casting for whatever you're purchasing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had a question I wanted to ask about your branding, Rebel Pastures. I know you used to be BA Pastures, right? That was Badass Pastures.
Mm-hmm.
We loved it.
Yeah,
we
loved it, but we were the only ones that knew what it meant.
I gotcha. So I had a question. We my family's familiar with like Black Rifle Coffee Company, who's really honed in and focused on marketing that is not politically correct, and they've done it on purpose to target like a specific demographic who appreciates that and would buy their product because they're not politically correct. And I feel like that's kind of maybe the mindset you guys might have had when you jumped in as Badass Pastures. I know there's a seasoning brand that a friend of mine uses. The parent company is called Big Cock Ranch, and they call their seasonings chicken shit and bullshit and special shit. And I know people that specifically go out of their way to buy that brand just because the marketing's great. They love that it's not politically correct. But I imagine if you're a 70-year-old grandma cooking Thanksgiving dinner, you're probably not going to appreciate a seasoning called chicken shit. And so I feel like there's a movement to market not politically correct to a lot of people. But I worry that maybe it's like you might be cutting off a generation or a demographic in your marketing. And so I appreciate that kind of marketing, and I wish I had the courage maybe to do it myself, I guess. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you guys determined your name, what you think of that that kind of marketing, if that's something you're maybe pursuing, and if you have, I guess, just thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
We had to move away from BA pastures because people thought it was like like sheep.
They're like, no, not yet.
Yeah, so that was one thing that was confusing, and because we want people to know we're using badass. Like, so we changed to Rebel Pastures, which you can see what we're both sporting today, and then our tagline is badass pastured proteins. So
we haven't lost the badass.
Yeah, we stuck with that.
Yeah.
But one before you talk about when we do have a lot of 70-year-old grandmas that love our badass pastured proteins. So
yeah,
I think it's an age demographic that doesn't like it. Yeah.
We're not trying to appeal to everyone. That's not our objective. We don't want to be the producer for everyone. We don't want everyone to be our customer. We want the people that give a damn. That's really what we're after. So this brand to us, it's not just about raising animals. This is about a story. This is about telling truth in a world that is so confusing, so manipulated to look differently than what it is, and concealed, and just the smoke and mirrors, we're done with it. And so the people that give a damn, in our opinion, will be attracted to that brand, will be attracted to the truth that we're sharing. We're just sharing our truth. And so our truth doesn't mean it's truth for everyone. Everyone can have their own truth, but for who we are, we want to be as transparent as we can. And one of the things, I was a Marine, combat infantryman Marine. And I see these cute, family farms, it's all friendly and, this, and, it just wasn't us. It's just not who we are as people. Like, we want to go out there, we want to crush this thing. We want to raise attention. We want to raise awareness. We want to shake and ruffle some feathers. That's who we are as people. And it always baffled me why so many people are just so living their life so safely to arrive at death safely. And so what I mean by that is, like, while we're here, we want to make an impact. And this isn't even about Jenni and Justin. I mean, this is about our kids and their kids someday. So, I mean, we're talking about the future of sustainability, the future of our food system, the future of our health, the future of humanity. And so I really can't find anything more important, more pressing than our food when I really, do that threat analysis or thought analysis myself. And so for us, we couldn't be quiet. We couldn't be timid. We couldn't be tame, and again, it's just not who we are. So if you can pair who you are with your mentality, I think that's where the real magic happens. I mean, we get up, this is hard work, no doubt about it, but we haven't been more pumped than we are now today. And now we're a few years into this, and we started 2020 and now it's 2023, but that's the mission. This isn't just about dollars. This isn't just about raising our own chickens, our own cattle. I mean, like, this is about a story about how we become so disenfranchised and so disconnected from our food system that now it is polluting our earth and our bodies and making us sick. And if something doesn't change, we'll all be eating lab-grown meat or some other highly processed... Or insects. Ain't happening. Like, I've seen the value that livestock, that cattle have pooping on the ground, walking around. And just to believe all this methane nonsense, like, go out to Will Harris's farm, go out to anybody that's doing a regenerative farm, and go look at that soil and what's happening. You see the dung beetles come in and dissipate and eat all that manure, and it breaks down, it goes into the soil. Dig into that soil and look at the worm count. And then go into a field that's been sprayed by, Bayer, Roundup and everything else. Put your shovel in that ground and count how many worms there are. Because I bet you can count on one hand how many worms are in one field versus the other field. And that's really what we're talking about, is resiliency. And so we can't be timid, going back to the branding thing. I mean, it's just, we're done.
I think that's an important distinction that I hadn't thought about, was branding yourself in that way, because that's who you are, and that's authentic to how you operate and how you want to run your business. As opposed to maybe doing it in sort of defiance, or maybe, specifically to be non-political. I think that's an important distinction, is like, you're doing it because that's who you are, not because this is going to attract the people that like this kind of branding and these kind of names and things like that. I think that's an important thing I really hadn't thought about.
We're not politically left or right. We're not. And for us, we love freedom and truth. And, we believe that we should control our future and that we are the ones that are responsible for the future, for our own future and for future collectively together. And so, listen, we're at an age, we're midlife here, I'm 42, like life's too short to beat around the bush and screw around with not being authentic and not being truly who you are and using your talents and your skills and your abilities and your passions for the greater good, and I think we need that more now than ever before. I really do. Just truth and hardworking people that can go out there and build something and tell a story about what's really going on and peeling back the layers of this onion that is so many layers deep that we're all so it's so deep that it's so confusing that we surrender, that we give up to do the work to really understand about our food system and our health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great perspective. Yeah, we're at an hour. If you guys want to keep going, we can keep going, but, I've asked all my pre-planned questions. So, I think that's probably a good place to end it if you guys would like. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you guys giving your time. I know you could be out with the chickens or out with the cows, but hopefully they've got a babysitter right now. So
yes.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. I'll let you know when everything's edited and we air everything, but
thank you, Josh.
thank you guys for
Sounds
coming
great,
on.
Josh.
Thanks for
Appreciate
coming.
This is good for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, guys, take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.